There we are.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to All of Us. My name is Rachel. I'm the chief encourager and founder here at All of Us, and I want to welcome you to episode 57 that I have titled All of Us Recalibrate. And Joe and I are talking to you from the future because it's January 1st when you hear and listen to this. But it's not January 1st right now while we're taping. So, hello, Joe, and welcome to All of Us.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. There we go.
You know what? I should have sent you some confetti so that we could just
Yeah,
throw
pop
it
some
in
things. May
there.
I be the first to wish you a Happy New
Happy
Year.
New Year.
Here we
Well,
go.
here we
Delight
go. Well, welcome to all of us. It's a long time coming.
you.
Joe Saxon, ladies and gentlemen, finally here on All of Us. And All of Us, for those of you that don't know, is a place where women tell their in-process stories of God's goodness and faithfulness. And for this episode, like I mentioned, we are going to be talking about recalibrating. And so I can't think of a better person, a better woman, a better leader to kick us off for this season. So, Joe, for those that don't know you or are becoming reacquainted today, could you introduce yourself? A little bit about you.
Well, thank you. I'm a Brit, a Nigerian Brit, but I'm based in the Minneapolis area in Minnesota. So winter is happening and
Mm.
will for some time. Married with a couple of kids. I was going to say kids, but they're actually young adults, which is staggering.
Crazy.
Um, and like many of you, I wear a number of hats. So my one of my jobs is the title is the executive director of the 25 at Bethel University, which is here in Minnesota. And basically, it's a leadership development initiative. And that's what I do there. Then I'm the founder of 𝐒 Collective, which is a gathering for Christian women leaders across industries. And then I host a podcast, co-host a podcast. I've done some writing, some speaking, things like that. So yay. That
Things
is
like that. Yay. Yes, love 𝐒 Collective. Grateful for that event ministry that you and Stephanie have together. It's so much fun. And speaking of that, since we'll go back to 𝐒 in a little bit, but
hmm.
beginning of the year, new year, a lot of people are picking words. They are, having affirmations for the year. Some of them are goal setting. Do you do any of that stuff? Like, is that a part of your rhythm as you begin the new year?
I mean, I've always been a very huge fan of New Year's resolutions. There is something about the idea of like clearing the deck, starting again.
Sure.
But the process I do, which evolved, I mean, it's taken me a while to work out when I started it, but I think it began as a conversation with my sister
Hmm.
when we were teenagers. And it's a process I call now hello, goodbye.
Mhm.
And it's an intentional process where you look at what you are saying goodbye to and
Yeah.
what you're saying hello to. And in some ways, people like it should be called hello, goodbye, hello. And technically, it probably should, but hello, goodbye sounded better.
Sounds much
And
better.
it came out of the reasoning of you can't, I want to say hello to all these new things, but I can't until I'm prepared to say goodbye to some of the others. I can't carry it. And it's basically asking the question to reflect on the year that's been. And there's something simple but intentional about the words hello and goodbye. Like you either said goodbye, you didn't. Do you know what I mean? You either left that place or you're still hanging in the doorway.
Right.
And if you're going to say hello to something, you've got to open the door. You've got to welcome it. And I think that was why those words landed really in terms of what process I wanted to engage with the new year in. And so my word for the year tends to come out of that. It emerges out of that process. My goals come out of that process.
Awesome. And do you just do that with Pastor Stephanie? Because I know that you guys have that on your podcast, or do you do that with other friends, or do you do that alone? Like, what's your typical rhythm for when you do hello, goodbye?
Yeah, I tend to do it on my own first, and then we do a form of it as a family, like just as a way of reflecting on the year.
Mhm.
And then probably lots of different iterations. I think I'm going to do it with my students at Bethel as
Yeah.
well to get them thinking about it. And then in the context of I go to Mill City, which is the church that Steph leads. So there's always a hello goodbye event that takes place around that time. And so
Oh.
I think and December, January is full of lots of versions, but I found I've needed to sit with it by myself
Yeah,
for
that's
a time
important. Yeah.
and in some ways let it emerge. I think with
Mm.
December and January, they're so full in
Mm.
different ways. There's the kind of big build up to all things around the holiday season. Then there's the big decompression afterwards, and the
Yeah.
all and all of these other things for those for whom that's their life. Um,
Right.
and so yeah, I need the time. I need.
Yeah. And I think that is a good framework, but also like a good, like, for people that are at the end of the year and they say, well, this is like the busiest season for me at work. And so I don't have the time to sit down. I remember our mutual friend, Latasha Ferguson, she's in, the teaching world. And so for her, she does this in July, August, because that's her calendar year for school. And
absolutely.
So you're listening and you're like, you know what, I don't have that time. This is my busy season at work. December is just not going to be it. Then switch that thing up. Like, do what works well for you based upon your calendar, your seasons, your assignments. It doesn't have to look one way. It's not one size fits all.
Absolutely. That's really good.
Yeah, for me, I sit down at the end of the year, do something like a hello goodbye, and then I have rhythms with certain friends. So with Ruth, who's been on All of Us and friend of ours, every year we sit down at dinner, but it's more of a kind of working hello goodbye dinner, right? So that's something that we have on the calendar every single year. We've just made that a part of our rhythm before we get into the new year. So whatever it is for y'all, figure out a framework. But I do think that it is important. And so for those, Joe, that, maybe they don't pick a word or they don't pick a phrase or have goals or these kind of transitions at the turn of the year and they're calibrating, what would you say to them? Like, how do you get started? Like, how do you figure out what works well for you? We both shared what works well for us, but how do you even start something like that if you've never done it before?
I think you've got to just start. Because I think for many of us, we have felt our way through to these things. And so when I first began looking at Hello Goodbye, before it was called that, it was a kind of like it looked different in different areas of my life. When I was single in my 20s, it was very much about guys and the highs and lows. It was like the what went well, what went badly, why are there so many lows here, kind of thing. And I think it's in some ways it's just a chance to look back and say, what happened?
Yeah.
What happened? How'd it go? And how did that impact me? And what do I want? What am I anticipating happening? What am I working towards? And I would say the primary things you really need is some space and find your way of kind of recording the information so you can step back and look at it. Whether that's a voice memo that you listen to on a long walk, whether that's something you write down, and whether it's a journaling process, whether it's a creative, artistic process, but you need something where, whatever it is, and whether it's in conversations where you can step back and say, this is what was.
Yeah.
And this is where we go. And again, it's something to be discovered rather than achieved. So you could try something like that didn't work, then stop it and try something else.
Correct. That's good. That's good. Be flexible. So Joe, I know you've already done Hello Goodbye and you've already kind of sat down because you've already taped your podcast related to it, but anything like in the areas that you think is good to share today with our community, whether it's something physically or spiritually, relationally, for your job that you are looking at 2025 that you're like, that needs some recalibration, like that needs to change. Anything worth noting that you'd like to share with us today?
The two that have stood out to me is one, physically. I really got into alpha strength and alpha conditioning, which is a kind of group fitness type way of inflicting pain on yourself, and and with barbells and dumbbells and burpees and the devil's it's in the name, folk. It's in the name, and all these other things, and it was great to try something different because it's not really my background and I was terrible at it. I've loved being really terrible at something and learning very, 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 very slowly how to improve. And I've enjoyed that and enjoy the people at it. And so that's been really good for me, but I am like a little bit beat up by it. So I'm also like, perhaps, have you thought about maybe doing a stretching thing? Having a, like, and for your health and fitness, you need cardio and strength and flexibility. And I've always been like, yeah, cardio or yeah, strength. Flexibility is boring.
Same. That's how I feel.
And it's boring, but also I'm 50 and I'm feeling the consequence of that attitude.
No.
And sometimes after one of the strength sessions, I feel the consequence of like if I forget to stretch and I'm like, on a practical level, that's probably one of the things I'm thinking I need to recalibrate. And I can be so all or nothing. I forget that sometimes something is better than all. And then I was thinking, it dawned on me that, again, years ago when I used to look at this, there was a chapter in my life, again in my mid-20s, where lots of connections and lots of people around. And I remember thinking, I don't know who to be friends with. And I would begin to, oh, how to develop friendships. And I started praying about, Lord, who do I invest in this year?
Mm,
What do I invest in relationally? And that has hit home in two ways for me as I think of 2025. Just again, partly because my life before I started working at Bethel was on the road for 10 years,
right.
primarily. So I met people at events and friends who were fellow speakers and things like that. And I didn't really have a community as such. Not I had a very limited community on the
Sure,
ground
sure.
because I didn't have much capacity to invest in many people. So I had a couple of friends, and then the rest were all meaningful relationships. But they're in Detroit, they're in Atlanta, they're
Yeah.
everywhere. They're in California, they're all over the place, in Florida, and so you don't see them. And now I have a life where I spend a lot more time here, and there are people here, and I'm like, oh, how, how do I invest in these friendships? And I have 30-year friendships of friends in England who you thought you'd.
Mm,
I never wanted to lose touch, but I thought, wow, we've managed over 30 years to still be like have meaningful friendships. Well, how do we invest in it into this next chapter? So I've been thinking about that. And alongside that, 2025 is the year I become an empty nester as my second kid goes to college.
that's right.
And I mean, it's a travesty, obviously, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. But apparently, it's wonderful. So, but my husband and I, we've been thinking about, oh my gosh, what is this? Because you have this long season where they are the focus, and not in a very physical way,
Sure.
whether it's whether they're latched onto your body being fed
Yes.
through to every recital, you're thinking of their friends and the play dates and the shots they've got to have and this and that and the other and all of these things. And then there's this growing independence that they have. And then you're worrying about them in the car and blah, blah, all these other sorts of things. And now it's like, oh, and now you're not living under my roof. You will be. You're home for Christmas. You're home. And I think it's going to be a real fun season, but it
Yeah.
is a very different day to day.
Yeah.
And then it's also Chris and I were like, so, well, here we are then. You know,
Here we are then.
and 2 decades have passed, and you're like, okay, well, what should we have for dinner? I
There's
guess
some recalibrating in marriage as well, I'm
I
assuming.
think there's this, and I think so we started talking about that already,
Good. Yes.
partly because when my youngest learned how to drive a couple of years back, it felt like the gong hit, and it was the bell of time saying, she's out of here, people. Get
No.
used to it. You mean gong and
Yes.
it's gone. So yes, I think those have been the things that I'm thinking of as I think about recalibrating.
Oh, thank you for sharing. And I, as share a couple of those. I'll share some from my world too. With fitness area, I feel like I've started to kind of recalibrate at the end of this session, at the end of this of 2024 with strength training. Because I've been a cardio girl. And after college soccer, I really hated lifting weights because it was a job and it was somebody yelling over me and it was a whole scenario. So I went the other direction. I was like, I will do all the cardio that a girl can do, but weights, we can be done. But as we know, with midlife and things change, we need more strength. And the cardio actually needs to be a little bit less, so I hear, and there needs to be more walking and more. So I am trying to recalibrate and and my body is changing. So I'm trying to recalibrate like, oh, what does this look like, with strength training? And so taking some steps forward, a friend of mine at our church like owns a gym. I'm like, this is a good start. I can contribute and support a Black woman that's running a gym, and I can get my strength train on, with a little bit of help and community. So that's an area that I'm recalibrating in 2025, strength training and finding a new rhythm for my fitness. And then for me, I think from a spiritual standpoint, I need more breaks from teaching, preaching, writing. And I don't know what that looks like. And
that's fascinating.
I know. I'm in school, as you know, so I'm in seminary. And so with that, it's like if I'm always reading some theological book and I'm all like, if there's always. So I just am recognizing that I need to take a little bit of a break.
I like
So yeah, those are two areas for
so.
me that need some recalibrating. What about work-wise, Joe? Did you mention anything work-wise that
Yeah,
you need
I mean,
recalibrating?
in some, I think the work-wise thing, because I have my job at Bethel, which is that grows over time and that, but I've been thinking more about the speaking, podcasting, and thinking of what it looks like to resource leaders. I think that's the thing I care about, resourcing leaders. So I'm beginning to feel twinges about writing again,
Ah,
which I'm a very, very slow burn on like the idea of books. And I'm not thinking of a book. I'm just thinking of writing again. So whether it's a Substack or something,
yeah,
which adds again, it's that thing of how do we resource people,
yeah,
and I've just kind of I'm sitting with that and feeling like that may be something I need to pay some attention to and to give some time to
yeah.
and to listening to people and also to responding and prepping some things.
So good. Well, I hope you're right, selfishly. I love it. Right. Uh,
Thank you. Okay.
maybe the space that I'm trying to create it will help me to write more too, because that's one of
Yeah.
my goals, which I love to do. So we'll see. Well, recalibrating, kind of shifting gears a little bit from our personal recalibration, but I want to talk more big picture
Yeah.
workplace. Want to talk wounding and workplace and
Mhm.
women. So at 𝐻𝐻𝑆r 2024, you and Steph, your title topic was leadership and power. It was wonderful, necessary, needed, timely, all the things. And so I want to talk a little bit to the woman leader who has experienced, unfortunately, abuse of power in the workplace and how one recalibrates after that in the workplace. Like any advice, the misuse of power in the workplace, how do you recalibrate?
I mean, it would depend on what it is, and how that has been. So, how that's impacted you. But I think there are some general principles in terms of, if the environment is unsafe, you have to ask yourself how long you can be there.
Yeah.
And there are different answers to that depending on our economics.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
if we're honest, and are there people you need to report depending on what the nature of them, if there's a sexual abuse or sexual harassment, then we want to encourage you to go through all the channels, the legal channels, to get the help you need,
Yes.
and to and to get that process moving.
Mhm.
But what I've seen for everybody who's encountered misuse of power, there are some things that are real slow.
Mm,
um healing is a Healing can be a painfully slow work,
mm.
um because there are so many layers to the misuse of power, of the consequence of broken trust, the
Yeah.
consequence of this was meant to be the job, that the consequence of being let down, the consequence of recognizing who it was that let you down.
Yeah.
Those things can be quite telling and quite painful. And
Mhm.
so I would want to ask what healing looks like for you. Who are you talking to? Is there a place where you can process this? And it might need to be a therapist. I mean, again, depending on the nature of it, but someplace where you can safely say it all.
Yeah, it's
Say it
good.
all.
Yeah.
I would really encourage that. And then I think there is a kindness to ourselves in that. And again, um, how we take care of our bodies in the midst of this. Because
Mhm.
I think when you're in pain, your vices aren't far away.
Yeah.
And so I want to encourage us to attend to those spaces too. And then I do think, and I would love to say you do this for this month and this, it's all intermingled. But
Yeah.
I do think you have to address the space you're in and say, is it time to leave? Is it time to stay? Do I need another environment? How has this impacted me professionally? And what do I need to do about that?
Yeah.
Is an important question to ask yourself. And maybe for some of us, it will have started with that. And then you still need the healing and you need the reflection and the space. And I think the reckoning of what it has cost you,
Oh, that's good.
the reckoning of what this did to your trust, your courage, your confidence, all those kinds of things.
Mm.
Um, a community around you, all those are important, but it could start in any of the orders because life is messier than that.
That's right, right. And I think too, if you're able to go away and do some
Mm,
kind of soul care or
yeah,
something to where
that's
you
so good.
separate from the
Mhm.
institution, the people, the person, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that I have found that time away and
Mhm.
alone with the Lord is really, really good, because then
Yeah.
it can help heal, or it can help you to see that
Yeah.
sometimes, depending on the abuse or what's going on, sometimes there's very much it's a you thing, that you may have put too much power in someone's hands that they have no right
Oh,
having.
that's good.
So I think just pulling away
Good.
is always great to see better and see what
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that is in recalibrating. So
Good. It's an important perspective, isn't it?
yes. And you mentioned a little bit community, Joe, and I do want to ask you, like, what role does our community have in us recalibrating, as the body of Christ? Obviously, we need the Lord, and we do that, but what role has community played in maybe even your life in recalibrating and finding some of these new rhythms and changing the way you think or go about things?
I mean, community is huge because on one level we can trip ourselves into the thinking of, well, all we need is the Lord, but the Lord modeled for us how to do this, and He modeled community.
That's
He
right.
modeled
Amen.
weeping in front of people and asking for help. He modeled them seeing the full spectrum of His emotions as He lived and walked and moved amongst them.
Mhm.
And it's hard, that it's a hard reality. So I think when I look back on my life, I've community has deeply wounded and deeply healed. I think
Yeah,
that's the struggle, isn't it? It's
yeah,
like,
struggle.
and I say that, I'm sure there are people who I've hurt as well. I know there are. And sometimes it's something I've done, and sometimes it's their expectations of what
Yeah,
I would be. So I think there are all, and I think it's one of those things where I've had to reckon with, did they hurt me, or did they not do what I expected? And how does that operate?
yeah, no, that's
Fine.
good.
So again, it's one of those things where you're like, wherever you're at with church, build trusted friends now, so that when you need them, that's not another hurdle you've got to overcome.
Yeah, that's good. That's so good. That's so good. And building that, like some people say, well, I don't have that. And I think it's no different than what we've spoken about this entire episode of what is the next right step? Like what
Yeah.
is the step
Yes.
towards
Agree.
building a community? And you mentioned recalibrating even your community now that you are more static in your city.
Yeah.
Is, well, what relationally, what does that look like for me? And taking next steps to figure out, well, maybe I need to invite more people to coffee, or maybe I need to
Yeah.
community group, or, maybe it's you that needs to go first, to build that community. But I have found that asking the Lord for, like, what is my next right step? If I know that I'm missing community, then
Mhm.
what's my part to play? God, I need you to play your part. But what's my part to play in
Absolutely. That's so good.
building this,
Yeah.
new rhythm and relationships that I'm missing, or whatever it
Yeah.
is. So huge, huge part. Well, Joe, wow, now 2 months now, since this is coming out January 1st, all of us will have its first restored retreat. And this one will be geared towards Black women. So two friends, one, 𝐞𝐞𝐭 𝐉𝐨, and my friend
Yay.
Luke are coming together to hold space for these Black women here in California for 2 nights and 3 days. The community has paid for them to be there so that they can rest, delight,
Ooh,
connect, and grow. With
wow.
our topic at hand, as we're talking about recalibration, why is it important specifically for Black women to go away and recalibrate together?
Oh, there are so many reasons. I am, and I know for some who may feel on the outside looking in that it's might be deemed unfair.
Mm,
It might be seen as separatist in some way,
mm,
or segregating in some way. But I would remind us that if we would look at the data would show the disparities amongst us.
yes.
I'm not blaming this. I'm not saying this is a blame thing at all. I'm just talking data in
Yeah.
terms of Black women and their earnings, Black women and their health, and how that health is attended to.
Mm-hmm.
Black women, menopause,
Mm-hmm.
its intensity. Black women and weathering in terms of their health and well-being and stress. Black women and racism. Black women and misogyny. Black women. The list goes on. And so I think when we reminded that the data shows the disparities, the data came from somewhere.
Yeah.
It came from the stories of the lived experiences of Black women.
Yeah.
Um, and and so I think it's important because you can't pour out of an empty cup.
Mm-hmm.
Also, worthy. just let's even start there. Worthy of. We are every human being is an image bearer, and
Yes.
humanity's first experience was rest.
Yeah.
And why shouldn't that be true for Black women as well? And
Amen.
so it needs to be a space where there are certain conversations and assumptions that you don't need to be considering or thinking through. And
Yeah.
I think as we look at the days ahead, there are, whether it's the rollback of DEI initiatives and that, these things will have implications. They may not immediately,
Yeah.
but they will have implications.
Mhm.
And so we can anticipate, unless things are done well and equitably, we can expect those certain disparities to get larger.
Yeah.
And so I think that alone would be it. A space to come and be, and as you described the retreat, it reminded me of when I was a kid, and on Sunday nights I used to get my hair done and my like braided and stuff, and my mum and my aunties were all sitting talking.
Yeah.
And the aunties were not siblings, they were friends, other Nigerian friends, women who were also in nursing like my mum.
Yeah.
And mostly the same tribe, but different tribes and Nigerian tribes and stuff. And they'd be talking about where you could get your food and
Yeah.
good agencies to work for and good spaces and places to avoid and things that weren't good for you and they were a brain trust for one another. They were a support system for one another, who a group of women who understood distinctly the challenges that these women would face as immigrants in an at that time hostile world.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who would help lead them to safe pasture. And say, come work here because this is someone who they don't abuse Black people here. Come and work here because they pay you well here. Go to that place for food because the food that you grew up with that you wish you could have, it's over there.
Yeah.
And these are the things. And I'm not saying that these women did it perfectly, but but it was a need.
Yes.
I mean, it was a need to be able to show up for work, be able to raise their children, to be able to have the courage to branch back into the worlds they were in, where they were the onlys and stuff.
Yeah.
They needed this. It was a retreat to advance.
Yep.
And so when I think of those women, I didn't understand the mentoring that was happening in the room, the counseling that was happening in the room, the acceptance that was happening, the way they would seamlessly move into different languages as they were talking and sharing, the way that they would watch the news because the TV was always on, and the news was like another member of the family, and how they would bring their perspective, and you'd hear them talking about different parts of Nigerian history and Biafra and all these other sorts of things and their understandings of things, where they didn't have to explain all of those pieces. Right. It was their story.
Yeah.
And their quirks and their laughter and their pain.
Yeah.
All of those things, and in their food and and all of that. All of these things were happening. And you need that. You need that when you're in an isolated space, because then you get to go back out there. They all went back to work. They all went back to their living and their stuff. Yeah. And they retained their identity. They retained their identity. And I think
so important. Yeah. To be seen and known and to just show up somewhere and not have to put on is so important. And so well, we're praying for these women in this March and just trusting the Lord will meet us, and I'm excited for that time. All right, Joe. Well, we're ending our time now, but I always end all of us episode with rapid fire. So I have to ask you, are you ready?
Okay, I am. Let me just stretch.
Stretch out. Just make sure you're ready.
Fear of my life. Okay, let's go.
Are going to be so hard. So, all right. God is
kind.
Recalibration in our lives is necessary because
the unexamined life is a crapshoot, friends.
That's probably the best. That's probably the best rapid fire we've ever done. And all of us are better when
we have healthy people around us.
Yes and amen. Well, Joe, thank you for being on all of us. And if people need to reach you, what's the quickest way? Of course, we'll put all this in the show notes, but what's the best way they can connect with you?
You can go to my website, 𝐤𝐥𝐶.com. You'll see all the things there. And then on the socials at 𝐤𝐥𝐶, except on X, because I left that dystopian hellscape. So
same. And Joe has a new website. I
Oh,
guess I
yes, I forgot
yeah.
to
She has a
mention.
new website. It's beautiful. And so I invite
Oh,
you
pretty.
in. We talked about 𝐻𝐻𝑆 Collective. There's links there for
Yes.
the new 𝐻𝐻𝑆 Collective in 2025. There'll be links on their Lead Stories podcast. I will
Yes.
also put links.
Newsletter.
Yeah, since we also talked about abuse, I'll put a couple of links in the show notes as well. If you are experiencing abuse,
Mm,
trauma, need resources,
yeah.
uh, all of us
Please get
also
the help
have,
you need.
yes, yes. And all of us also has a free mental health resources guide on the website that's been curated by therapists, women therapists in our community. So
Lovely.
I'll put the link to that as well. But for now, we must say goodbye. So thank you, all of us family, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.